It was a bright and sunny morning when the news spread like wildfire across the city. A well-known billionaire, famous for his sharp business mind and extravagant lifestyle, had announced that he was married. The announcement alone would have been big news, but what made it even more shocking was the identity of his new wife. She was young, elegant, and seemed almost ordinary at first glance. People whispered everywhere, on social media, in cafes, and in the office corridors. No one expected him to marry someone so young, someone who had not been part of the glamorous circles he usually moved in. The city was full of speculation. Everyone wondered what had brought them together. How could a woman, with no apparent connections to wealth or power, suddenly become the wife of one of the richest men in the country? Some people suggested it was love at first sight. Others, more skeptical, immediately jumped to conclusions. They said it was obvious she married for money, that her heart was not in the right place. The whispers grew louder as reporters started digging into her past. But the woman herself seemed calm. She walked gracefully in public events, smiled politely, and never commented on the rumors. Her presence had a certain quiet confidence that made people curious, even those who doubted her motives. Friends and distant relatives of the billionaire had mixed reactions. Some congratulated him warmly, thinking perhaps he had finally found someone who understood him. Others, however, were skeptical, especially those who had known him for years. They remembered his previous relationships and the heartbreaks he had faced. They remembered how careful he was with money and trust. Marrying so suddenly to someone new and young seemed risky. But the billionaire seemed different this time. There was a happiness in his eyes that his closest friends could not ignore. He looked lighter, more relaxed, and even joked during dinners in a way he had not in years. The young wife, meanwhile, had a past that was simple but interesting. She came from a small town where she had spent her childhood learning music, helping her family, and studying hard. From an early age, she loved the piano. Her fingers would dance on the keys for hours, creating melodies that would make anyone who heard them pause for a moment. Music was her refuge, her escape, and her joy. She never imagined that one day her life would change so dramatically, that she would move from a quiet town to the mansions and skyscrapers of a city she had only seen in movies. Despite all the attention, she stayed grounded. She didn't let the media or gossip affect her. She had learned early on that life was unpredictable and that people often judged based on appearances alone. She focused on being herself, quietly observing the world around her, and learning to navigate the strange and luxurious life that now surrounded her. She was kind and respectful to everyone she met, from the maids in the mansion to the chauffeurs and security staff. People noticed this, and slowly, some of the skepticism began to fade. The first public event they attended together became the talk of the town. The billionaire, tall and confident in a tailored suit, walked beside his new wife, who wore a simple but elegant dress. Cameras flashed endlessly, reporters asked questions, and social media exploded with comments. Some praised her beauty and poise. Others were harsh, questioning her motives. But she didn't seem bothered. Instead, she smiled, answered questions politely, and even laughed at some of the playful comments. The more she acted naturally, the more people were intrigued. Many began to wonder if there was more to her than met the eye. In private, life was very different from what people imagined. The mansion was enormous, with rooms that seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with expensive art and furniture. She had to learn quickly how to move in this new world, how to understand the schedules of staff, how to manage public appearances, and how to handle the constant attention that came with marrying a billionaire. It was overwhelming at times, but she adapted. Her love for music helped her stay calm. In the quiet of the evening, she would sit at the grand piano in the living room, letting the notes flow and relaxing her mind. Even the billionaire, who had been busy with his businesses all day, would sometimes pause to listen. He was amazed at the depth and emotion in her music, realizing that there was a side to her that was genuine and pure, far from the whispers of society. Not everyone welcomed her with open arms. Some family members were distant, watching her closely, trying to find signs of insincerity. They asked questions that seemed casual but were meant to uncover her true intentions. She answered politely, without defensiveness, showing patience and grace. The more she stayed calm and composed, the more people realized that perhaps she was not what the rumors suggested. Her sincerity slowly started to shine through. Still, life in the public eye was not easy. Every decision, every movement, and even every smile was analyzed. The press wrote articles, social media debated her motives, and people in high society speculated endlessly. She was aware of all this but never let it control her. Instead, she focused on learning, growing, and finding small joys in everyday life. She found comfort in simple moments. A quiet morning at the mansion, a cup of tea by the window, a short walk in the garden. These moments reminded her that there was more to life than gossip and money. As the days passed, the billionaire's friends began to notice subtle changes in him. He laughed more, seemed less stressed, and occasionally appeared almost playful, a side of him that few had seen before. They couldn't deny that the young wife had brought a new energy into his life. She was not just a companion. She was someone who inspired calmness and warmth in a man who had always been surrounded by stress and high-stakes decisions. Even skeptics began to wonder if there was more to their relationship than money or appearances. Despite the growing curiosity and gossip, she remained herself. She attended charity events, dinners, and public gatherings with the same humility and poise she had shown from the start. People who met her often remarked on her natural charm and intelligence. They noticed how she listened more than she spoke, how she treated people with respect, and how her presence seemed to make others feel comfortable. Slowly, some of the harsh judgments began to soften. Yet deep down, she knew that the biggest test was still ahead. Marrying a billionaire brought more than luxury. It brought scrutiny, pressure, and challenges that she could not anticipate. She had to prove herself not to the world, but to the people closest to him. The family, friends, and even employees who watched her every move. And while she understood that some would always doubt her, she also knew she had her own strengths. Her talent, her sincerity, and her ability to remain true to herself no matter what. Little did anyone know, her greatest moment would come unexpectedly, in a setting that no one could predict. A moment that would silence critics, leave people speechless, and show everyone that there was more to her than appearances. For now, though, she continued to live each day with grace, learning the rules of this new world, and preparing herself for whatever life would throw her way. Every glance, every smile, every gentle note on the piano was a quiet step toward revealing her true self, a step toward a story that was only just beginning to unfold. The city continued to buzz, the rumors continued to swirl, but she walked calmly through it all, her mind at peace. She had learned a long time ago that patience and quiet confidence often spoke louder than gossip. The young wife's story was just beginning, and no one could yet imagine how her talent and courage would soon take center stage, leaving the world amazed and questioning everything they thought they knew about her. After the wedding, the city was buzzing more than ever. People couldn't stop talking about the young wife and her sudden entrance into the billionaire's world. Some were still skeptical, whispering that she had married for money, while others wondered if there could be more to her story. Her calm, graceful behavior only made people more curious. She didn't try to prove herself to anyone, but her quiet confidence sparked endless conversations. The first few months of married life were a whirlwind. Every day felt different, like living in a world that was part dream and part challenge. The mansion was enormous, with countless rooms she had yet to explore. She had to adjust to the staff, the schedules, and the endless attention from the public and the press. Even simple things like going shopping became complicated because people recognized her immediately. But she faced everything patiently, understanding that this was part of the life she had entered. Despite the grandeur and constant attention, she tried to keep her life normal. She would wake up early, spend some time at the piano, and enjoy a quiet breakfast before the day began. Music had always been her escape, and even now, it remained her source of calm. Sometimes, she would close her eyes and let her fingers move freely across the keys, losing herself in the melodies. The billionaire noticed these moments and quietly admired her. He had never seen anyone move so naturally with such talent and emotion. There was something honest in her music, something that money could never buy. Even though she tried to stay calm, she couldn't ignore the whispers. People in high society were curious and judgmental. Some distant relatives would occasionally visit and make subtle comments, questioning her intentions without ever speaking directly. Employees watched her closely, trying to figure out if she was sincere. Social media users shared pictures and speculated endlessly. Each rumor could have been discouraging, but she chose not to let it affect her. She reminded herself that people often judge based on what they see, not what they know. She focused on being genuine, knowing that her actions would speak louder than words. The billionaire's friends were also divided. Some were cautious, watching how she handled her new life and responsibilities. They had seen him go through heartbreak before and didn't want him to be hurt again. Others, however, were impressed. They noticed how she treated people with respect, how she was polite to everyone, no matter their role in the household. Slowly, even skeptics began to accept that she was different. She wasn't just charming or beautiful. She had a warmth and sincerity that couldn't be faked. One day, a distant relative came to visit the mansion, bringing with him subtle tension. He had always been wary of outsiders, and he made it clear through his words and expressions that he did not trust the new wife. He asked questions about her past, her family, and even her music. She answered politely and honestly without defensiveness, which only made him more curious. He had expected hesitation or nervousness, but instead, he saw a calm and thoughtful woman who seemed unaffected by his probing. This made him rethink the judgments he had made before. Life at the mansion had its own set of challenges. The household was full of staff members, each with their own routines, personalities, and expectations. The new wife made an effort to learn everyone's name, understand their roles, and show appreciation for their work. She would smile at the housekeepers, ask about their families, and even sit down for a cup of tea with the gardener when he had time. These small gestures did not go unnoticed. Staff who had been suspicious of her gradually warmed up to her presence. They saw that she was kind, respectful, and genuinely interested in people beyond her own needs. Despite the growing acceptance from some, tension remained in the family. Some relatives still believed that she married for money and watched her closely. They tried to find flaws, mistakes, or signs of dishonesty. Every decision she made, every comment she said, was analyzed and judged. It was exhausting at times, but she remained steady. She had learned long ago that patience and composure were powerful tools. She knew that rushing to prove herself would only create more misunderstandings. Instead, she focused on living her life with integrity and grace. Public events were another challenge. She attended charity galas, dinners, and social gatherings with the billionaire. Cameras followed her everywhere, capturing every smile, every gesture, and every outfit. People compared her to previous partners of the billionaire and criticized her for the smallest details. But she never let it affect her demeanor. She spoke politely, laughed when appropriate, and listened more than she spoke. Over time, people began to notice a different side of her. Someone who was not just a trophy or a socialite, but a thoughtful, intelligent woman. Music continued to be her refuge. Each night, she would sit at the grand piano in the mansion's living room, playing melodies that reflected her thoughts and emotions. Sometimes the billionaire would sit quietly in a corner, listening to her play. He was captivated by the depth of feeling in her music. It wasn't just technical skill. It was emotion, storytelling, and honesty. He started to understand her in ways words could not express. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace in his home, a feeling that had been missing despite all his wealth and success. Even outside the mansion, the young wife faced curiosity and doubt. People in the city talked about her endlessly. Some criticized her, some praised her, and some were simply fascinated. She learned to ignore the negativity and focus on what mattered most. Her own growth, her happiness, and her connection with the billionaire. She realized that life was full of judgments, but the opinions of others did not define her. What mattered was staying true to herself and handling every situation with dignity and calmness. As the months went by, small victories slowly built her credibility. Staff members who had been wary began to trust her. Friends of the billionaire started inviting her to casual gatherings, testing her character in informal settings. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just remained herself. Her honesty, humility, and kindness started to speak louder than any rumors or doubts. Even the relatives who had been most skeptical began to soften, noticing that she was more than just a young woman living in a mansion. She was someone with character, passion, and heart. Yet, there was still a cloud of suspicion. Some family members whispered behind closed doors, questioning her motives and waiting for signs of weakness. The young wife knew this, but she didn't let it consume her thoughts. Instead, she focused on meaningful actions. She volunteered at local charities, organized small gatherings for friends, and quietly built bonds with the people around her. She didn't need to prove herself through grand gestures. Her consistent, thoughtful behavior gradually turned doubts into respect. One evening, a close friend of the billionaire confided in him about their surprise. "I didn't think she would last," the friend admitted. "I thought she might be after the money. But now, I see something different. She's calm, respectful, and kind. I don't know what you see in her, but I can't deny that she has something special." The billionaire smiled quietly, knowing that he had found someone who was not just a companion, but a partner in life. Someone who brought warmth, calm, and authenticity into his often stressful and demanding world. Even with growing respect and admiration from some, the young wife knew the real challenge was yet to come. She could navigate the mansion, the staff, and social events, but the ultimate test would be the family's scrutiny during significant events, especially those involving the billionaire's wealth and legacy. She understood that judgments could come at any moment, and the pressure would increase. But she also knew that her talent, patience, and sincerity were her strongest allies. She needed to stay composed no matter what happened. Through it all, she never lost her humanity. She laughed when she found things funny, helped when she could, and comforted others when they were in need. She understood that life in the public eye could be harsh, but she didn't let it harden her heart. Her music remained a refuge, her guiding light, and the true reflection of who she was. In the quiet of the evenings, when she played the piano, she felt connected to something deeper, a sense of purpose, calm, and authenticity that no one could take away. The months of adjusting, observing, and quietly proving herself began to have a cumulative effect. Staff who had been suspicious became allies. Friends who had been doubtful began to trust her judgment. Even some of the relatives who had doubted her intentions started to soften their stance. Slowly but surely, she was earning a place not just in the mansion, but in people's hearts. The journey was not easy, but her quiet determination, her integrity, and her talent were making it possible. And yet, despite all the small victories, the biggest test had not yet arrived. A moment would soon come that would challenge every rumor, every doubt, and every judgment that had been cast upon her. It would be a moment that no one expected, a moment that would leave people speechless, and a moment where her true self, the depth, passion, and authenticity of her character, would shine in ways that words alone could never convey. Until that moment, she continued to live with quiet confidence, graceful patience, and a focus on what truly mattered. Each day, each action, and each note she played on the piano brought her closer to a revelation that would astonish everyone around her. The young wife had entered a world full of skepticism and judgment, but she had begun to navigate it with a balance of calm, intelligence, and heart. And as she played her music in the mansion's quiet corners, she was unknowingly preparing for a day that would change everything forever. The months went by quietly, yet under the surface, tension was building. The young wife had settled into the rhythm of the mansion and its endless expectations, but she could feel the subtle watchfulness of the billionaire's family. They hadn't fully accepted her yet. Every family dinner, every casual meeting, felt like a test. Their eyes followed her, their questions carried hidden doubts, and their smiles were often polite but guarded. She had learned to navigate these interactions with grace, listening carefully, answering honestly, and never letting herself show frustration. The billionaire, who had always been private about family matters, noticed the undercurrents. He could sense the subtle tension and the judgments that were quietly passed in hushed tones. He admired how she handled it all, never losing her composure. He often thought to himself that her calmness was unlike anything he had seen before. She didn't fight, she didn't argue, she simply stayed herself, and that, in a way, was more powerful than confrontation. Despite the polite smiles, some relatives couldn't hide their suspicion. They whispered among themselves, wondering if she had truly married for love, or if money was her only motivation. They compared her to other women who had been close to the billionaire over the years and tried to find any indication of deceit. But she gave them nothing to grasp onto. She was patient, kind, and respectful, always careful not to give anyone a reason to doubt her character. It frustrated them in a strange way because their suspicions demanded evidence, yet she offered none. As winter approached, the billionaire had to leave the city for business. The young wife stayed behind in the mansion, managing daily life with a quiet strength. It was a time of reflection for her, moments when she could think about how far she had come and how much she had yet to prove. She still faced scrutiny from family and staff, but she had grown stronger. She had learned that people judged quickly and spoke harshly, but she could only control her own actions. She kept to her routine, waking up early, enjoying a cup of tea, practicing on the piano, and making small gestures that showed her care for everyone around her. One afternoon, while reading a book by the window, she received a call from the billionaire. His voice was calm, but she could sense an edge of concern. "The family wants us to come to the city for the will reading," he said. She knew immediately that this would be the moment of truth. The will reading was a formal event, and everyone would be scrutinizing her every move. She had prepared herself for months, but the weight of anticipation still made her heart beat faster. In the days leading up to the event, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. Staff members were buzzing with excitement and anxiety. The young wife quietly organized her wardrobe, choosing outfits that were elegant but not extravagant. She wanted to convey respect and humility, but also a quiet confidence. She reviewed her interactions with family members in her mind, preparing for questions, polite greetings, and subtle tests of her patience. She knew that this was not just about money. It was about trust, perception, and character. When they arrived at the city estate, the young wife immediately noticed the tension in the air. Relatives gathered in the grand hall, their expressions a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and restrained judgment. The billionaire stood beside her, offering a reassuring hand and a small smile. His presence gave her strength, but she also knew that this moment was hers to navigate. Every word, every gesture, every movement would be noticed. She reminded herself to stay calm, to remain true to herself, and to respond with grace and honesty. The will reading began with formalities. The lawyer carefully explained the process, and the room listened in silence. Each relative's eyes shifted between the lawyer, the billionaire's family, and her. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but she did not falter. Instead, she focused on small details, the texture of the tablecloth, the soft ticking of a nearby clock, the faint scent of flowers in the room. These small observations grounded her, helping her remain present and composed. Questions arose quickly, mostly subtle but pointed. A distant cousin asked about her family background, trying to gauge her motivations. She answered politely, providing brief but honest details. She spoke of her childhood, her love for music, and the values her parents had instilled in her. Her words were simple, sincere, and unhurried. Some relatives exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. They expected hesitation, perhaps a sign of nervousness or dishonesty, but instead, they found calm and authenticity. The atmosphere shifted slightly when the discussion turned to the billionaire's business and financial legacy. Some relatives subtly implied that she might be interested in control or profit. Again, she remained composed. She explained her respect for his work, her willingness to learn, and her desire to support him in meaningful ways. She did not overstate her knowledge or try to impress anyone. Her honesty was evident, and slowly, some of the whispers in the room softened into nods of acknowledgement. Even the staff noticed a change. Those who had been skeptical began to watch her differently, seeing her as a person of integrity rather than just a young woman who married for money. Her patience, kindness, and quiet strength had begun to leave an impression. The more she stayed herself, the more people realized that her intentions were genuine. She had not sought attention. She had not tried to manipulate situations. She simply lived with honesty and care, and it was beginning to show. The turning point came unexpectedly. As the lawyer continued reading, a brief pause fell over the room. The young wife, feeling a quiet impulse, walked over to the grand piano that had been placed near the window. She did not announce her intention or ask permission. She simply sat, placed her hands over the keys, and began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, and precise. The room fell silent, not out of surprise alone, but out of the sheer beauty of the sound. Her performance was more than music. It was a story. Each note seemed to convey emotion, depth, and honesty. She played with skill and passion, yet her playing was also vulnerable and human. Relatives who had been suspicious paused, unsure how to react. Staff who had watched her for months found themselves captivated. Even the billionaire, standing quietly nearby, felt a swell of admiration and pride. Her music spoke in ways words could not. As the piece continued, the room seemed to shift. Some relatives leaned forward, fully engaged for the first time. Others closed their eyes, letting the melodies wash over them. The skepticism, tension, and judgment that had filled the room melted into awe and admiration. People were experiencing a side of her they had never imagined. A side that was genuine, talented, and deeply human. They realized that her life, her talents, and her presence were more than appearances or assumptions. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. No one spoke immediately. It was as if everyone in the room had been touched by something rare and unspoken. Then, slowly, the applause began, growing in strength and sincerity. The young wife stood, bowed slightly, and returned to her seat beside the billionaire. He smiled warmly, squeezing her hand gently. He knew that her music had spoken volumes, not just to the family, but to everyone present. The rest of the will reading proceeded with less tension than expected. Relatives who had been skeptical approached her differently, showing a newfound respect. Staff members whispered quietly about her talent and composure. Even some distant relatives, who had expected drama, admitted privately that they had misjudged her. The young wife had not only navigated a challenging situation but had subtly transformed the way people saw her, using her music as a bridge between doubt and understanding. Later, as the family gathered for refreshments, the atmosphere felt lighter. Conversations were warmer, and the previously tense interactions had softened. The young wife moved among the group with the same grace and calmness as always, her presence no longer a source of scrutiny but a point of genuine admiration. People began to ask questions about her music, her life, and her experiences. She answered kindly and thoughtfully, never boasting or exaggerating, but sharing her truth with honesty and warmth. The billionaire's friends, who had been cautious about her, now nodded with approval. They had watched her handle a high-pressure, judgment-filled situation with integrity, patience, and authenticity. They realized that she was not simply a figurehead or a socialite, but someone with depth, intelligence, and genuine character. Her actions had spoken louder than any rumors or gossip, leaving a lasting impression on everyone in the room. That evening, as the mansion quieted, the young wife sat at the piano once again. She reflected on the day, on the moments of tension, the whispers, and the unexpected praise. She realized that she had grown stronger, not just in the eyes of others, but within herself. She had faced scrutiny, skepticism, and judgment and had remained true to her values. Her music had been her voice, her shield, and her way of expressing honesty in a world full of assumptions. The experience left her more confident, aware that life in this world would continue to challenge her, but also assured that she could meet those challenges with grace and integrity. The whispers would never fully disappear, but she understood now that they could not define her. What mattered was her character, her actions, and her ability to remain calm and true to herself, even in the most pressured and scrutinized moments. And as she played softly that night, the melodies filled the empty halls of the mansion, echoing not just in the rooms, but in her heart. It was a reminder that authenticity, patience, and human connection were far stronger than rumors or judgment. She had faced the first real test of her new life, and she had not only survived but had begun to win the respect, trust, and admiration of those who had doubted her most. The days after the will reading were a mixture of relief and anticipation. The young wife had managed the delicate situation with grace, but she knew that the real test of her character and talent had not yet fully arrived. There were still subtle glances of doubt from some family members, quiet questions whispered behind closed doors, and the ever-present scrutiny from the staff who watched her closely. She had learned to live with it, but her heart carried a quiet hope that she could bridge the gap between skepticism and genuine admiration. Life at the mansion returned to its normal rhythm, though the atmosphere was different now. Some relatives, who had been cautious before, now offered small gestures of acceptance. A nod here, a smile there, or a genuine compliment about her kindness or her taste in music. Even the staff seemed more relaxed around her. They watched her handle the routines of the mansion with calm efficiency, noticing her patience, her attention to detail, and her genuine concern for everyone's well-being. These were small victories, but they mattered. She had learned that trust and respect were earned over time, not demanded in a single gesture. Despite the slow acceptance from others, she remained grounded. She knew that appearances could be deceiving, and that one's true character often revealed itself only when the world least expected it. She continued her daily rituals with quiet consistency. Early mornings were spent at the piano, letting her fingers glide across the keys, creating melodies that reflected her inner thoughts. Afternoons were filled with managing small tasks in the mansion, interacting with staff, and attending to the billionaire's needs. Evenings were often calm, a time when she could reflect and prepare for whatever challenges awaited her. One evening, the billionaire invited a few close friends to the mansion for a private dinner. The young wife prepared everything herself, from choosing the menu to arranging the table. She did not want to show off. She simply wanted to create a welcoming and warm environment. The guests arrived, polite but curious, having heard about her recent handling of the will reading. They had been skeptical before, but tonight, they were ready to see her character for themselves. The dinner began with light conversation, polite exchanges, and careful observation. Some guests asked subtle questions about her past, her interests, and her experiences. She answered honestly, never exaggerating or boasting, sharing small stories from her life with warmth and clarity. Her demeanor, calm and genuine, began to ease the tension in the room. Guests started to see her not as a young woman marrying for money, but as someone with depth, intelligence, and humanity. After dinner, one of the billionaire's friends suggested that she play the piano. There was a playful tone in his voice, but also a subtle challenge, an unspoken test of her talent and poise. The young wife looked at him calmly, then walked over to the grand piano in the corner of the room. She sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys for a brief moment. The room fell silent, everyone watching intently, curious to see what she would do. She began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, and filled with emotion. It was a melody that captured attention immediately, drawing the listeners into the story she was telling through her music. Every note was precise, yet natural, flowing effortlessly from her hands. Her performance was not just about skill. It was about feeling, expression, and connection. Each chord, each subtle pause, seemed to communicate something deeper than words ever could. The guests listened in awe, some leaning forward as if trying to capture every sound, every emotion. The music was moving, not just technically impressive but emotionally profound. It spoke of resilience, patience, and the quiet strength that the young wife had cultivated over the past months. Even those who had been skeptical found themselves captivated, caught off guard by the depth and sincerity of her playing. As she continued, the room seemed to transform. The air felt lighter, filled with a sense of wonder and respect. The billionaire, standing nearby, watched with a mixture of pride and admiration. He had seen glimpses of her talent before, but this performance revealed something extraordinary, a combination of skill, emotion, and authenticity that left no doubt about her character. The skeptics in the room could no longer dismiss her as someone seeking wealth alone. Her music had spoken louder than any rumors or assumptions. When the piece ended, there was a moment of complete silence. Everyone was still, as if caught between disbelief and admiration. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started softly, hesitant at first, then grew steadily, filling the room with warmth and genuine appreciation. The young wife rose from the piano, bowed slightly, and returned to her seat. Her calm smile reflected the quiet confidence she had developed, knowing that she had bridged the gap between doubt and respect through her talent and sincerity. The rest of the evening continued with a lighter atmosphere. Conversations flowed more freely, laughter returned to the room, and the guests treated her with a newfound respect. Even those who had doubted her the most approached her with curiosity and warmth, asking questions about her music, her childhood, and her experiences. She answered graciously, never seeking to impress, but sharing her truth in a way that drew people closer. The billionaire's friends were quietly impressed. They had witnessed firsthand how she handled pressure, scrutiny, and judgment, and how she had transformed the atmosphere simply by being herself. Her talent was undeniable, but it was her authenticity, patience, and quiet strength that truly left an impression. They began to understand that she was more than just a young woman in a mansion. She was a person of substance, capable of inspiring respect and admiration through her actions and presence. After the guests left, the young wife sat alone at the piano once more. She reflected on the evening, on the small victories, the whispered doubts, and the unexpected recognition of her talent. She understood that this was just the beginning. Life in this world would continue to test her, but she had learned that authenticity and patience were her greatest allies. Her music, her actions, and her calm demeanor had begun to shape how people perceived her, and that, she knew, was far more powerful than any words or explanations. In the following days, news of the dinner and her performance spread quietly. Some relatives spoke of it privately, acknowledging that they had underestimated her. Staff members whispered about her talent and composure. Even the billionaire noted how her presence seemed to soften tensions and create harmony in the household. It was clear that she was gradually earning respect, not through force or assertion, but through her consistent, thoughtful, and authentic approach to life. Despite these positive signs, the young wife remained humble. She did not let praise or recognition change her behavior. She continued her daily routines with quiet dedication, practicing the piano, managing the mansion, and interacting with everyone respectfully. She knew that true respect and trust were earned over time, and she was willing to be patient. She understood that life in the public eye could be unpredictable, and that people's opinions could shift quickly. But she had learned to stay centered, grounded in her values and her character. Even as admiration for her grew, some relatives and observers still carried skepticism. They watched quietly, waiting for signs of weakness or inconsistency. But each day, each interaction, and each note of music played with sincerity only reinforced their changing perceptions. The young wife's consistent authenticity became her greatest tool, gradually replacing doubt with respect, suspicion with admiration, and judgment with curiosity. The mansion itself seemed to reflect her growing influence. Rooms felt warmer, staff interactions were smoother, and the overall atmosphere carried a sense of calm and harmony. Even the billionaire, who had always been surrounded by stress and business pressures, found a sense of peace in the home that he had not known before. Her presence, her calm strength, and her talent had brought a new energy to the mansion, one that was quietly transforming everyone around her. And yet, she knew that the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more scrutiny, and more moments where her patience, composure, and authenticity would be tested. But she also knew that she had proven something important, that genuine talent, honesty, and quiet strength could leave a powerful impact, even in the face of skepticism and judgment. She had begun to earn respect, not through force or confrontation, but through the simple power of being herself. As evening fell, she played one final melody for herself, her fingers moving gently across the keys. The music filled the quiet halls of the mansion, echoing in empty rooms and reflecting in her own heart. It was a reminder that life was not about appearances or rumors, but about truth, integrity, and the small, consistent actions that define a person. She had faced doubt, scrutiny, and judgment, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. Her journey was far from complete, but tonight, she had won a significant victory, not just in the eyes of others, but in her own understanding of herself. She had proven that patience, authenticity, and genuine talent could bridge gaps, change perceptions, and create moments of quiet triumph that no wealth or status could ever achieve. And as she left the piano and walked to her room, she carried with her a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had taken another meaningful step in her journey, a journey that was only just beginning. The morning after her piano performance, the mansion was unusually quiet. The young wife woke early, as she always did, and walked through the halls, noticing subtle changes in the way people moved and looked at her. Staff members greeted her with a little more warmth, with smiles that had been missing before. Even the distant relatives who had once doubted her had a new expression in their eyes, a mixture of surprise and respect. The atmosphere had shifted overnight, though no one had announced it. Everyone sensed that something had changed, even if they weren't yet ready to say it aloud. The young wife went to the grand piano, her fingers lightly brushing the keys as she thought about the previous night. She remembered the silence, the faces of the guests, the pause before the applause. It had been a moment of pure human connection, where judgment gave way to understanding. She hadn't expected such a response, but she realized that her music had done more than entertain. It had opened hearts and softened skepticism. And now, she could feel its effect ripple quietly through the mansion. As she moved through the day, she noticed how differently people interacted with her. Staff who had been distant were now more willing to talk, to share small stories or ask for advice. They treated her not as a guest or an outsider, but as someone who belonged. The subtle gestures, the head nods, the polite smiles, the respectful tone, were proof that she had earned their quiet trust. It was a small, almost invisible victory, but it mattered deeply to her. She had learned that respect was often won in silence, through consistent actions and authentic behavior, rather than loud declarations. Later in the day, some of the billionaire's close friends came to visit. They had heard about her piano performance and were curious to see how she handled the attention. She welcomed them with calm confidence, offering tea and a warm smile. Conversation flowed naturally, and they began to ask her about her life, her music, and her experiences. She answered thoughtfully, sharing anecdotes about her childhood, her love for the piano, and the values that had shaped her. The friends listened with genuine interest, and their earlier skepticism seemed to melt away. They began to see her as a person of depth and authenticity, rather than someone defined by her marriage or the wealth surrounding her. Even some of the family members, who had previously questioned her motives, approached her differently now. They were still cautious, but curiosity had replaced suspicion. A distant cousin, who had always been polite but guarded, asked her softly about the melodies she played the night before. The young wife spoke honestly, explaining how music was a language she had learned as a child, a way to express emotions that words could not capture. The cousin listened, leaning forward, and nodded slowly, showing a quiet acknowledgement of her talent and sincerity. Throughout the day, the young wife remained calm and composed, understanding that actions often spoke louder than words. She did not seek approval or praise, but she carried herself with a natural grace that drew people in. The staff, the friends, and even the relatives began to interact with her differently, noticing her authenticity and quiet confidence. It was a transformation that happened not through force, but through the subtle power of consistent, kind, and thoughtful behavior. In the afternoon, the billionaire joined her for a brief walk in the mansion's gardens. The crisp air carried the scent of blooming flowers, and the soft rustle of leaves created a peaceful atmosphere. He glanced at her, seeing the calm strength in her eyes, and felt a deep sense of admiration. "You handled everything yesterday perfectly," he said quietly. "I don't think anyone could have done what you did." She smiled softly, acknowledging the compliment without arrogance. She knew that the real reward was not praise, but the quiet understanding she had fostered among those around her. As evening approached, the young wife prepared for a small gathering of relatives who had been especially skeptical of her. She chose her words carefully, as always, and maintained a gentle, respectful demeanor. When the relatives arrived, their initial expressions were cautious, but they could not hide their curiosity. They had heard about the piano performance, and though some remained doubtful, they were intrigued to see the woman who had left such a strong impression. The gathering began with polite conversation, but the young wife soon noticed a subtle tension. Some relatives were testing her, asking questions that seemed casual but carried hidden meaning. She answered each question with honesty and composure, never showing irritation or defensiveness. Her calm demeanor, combined with her thoughtful responses, slowly shifted the atmosphere. Doubt began to give way to curiosity, and skepticism softened into genuine interest. At one point, a particularly critical relative asked about her intentions in marrying the billionaire. She paused briefly, then spoke sincerely. "I married him because I admire him," she said softly. "I respect his mind, his work, and the person he is. My goal has never been money or status. I want to share a life of meaning, learning, and respect with him." The room went quiet. Her words were simple, honest, and unguarded, and they carried a weight that no argument or defense could ever match. After a moment, one of the relatives nodded slowly, a subtle gesture of acknowledgement. Others exchanged glances, realizing that they had misjudged her. They had assumed that her youth, elegance, and sudden entrance into wealth meant opportunism, but her words and actions revealed something far more genuine. Her patience, composure, and authenticity had begun to break down the walls of skepticism that had surrounded her. Later that evening, the young wife was asked once more to play the piano. She agreed, but this time it was not about proving anything to anyone. She played because it was a part of who she was, a way to express herself and share a piece of her soul. Her fingers moved gracefully across the keys, producing a melody that was both intricate and emotional. Each note seemed to tell a story, reflecting her journey, her challenges, and her quiet triumphs. The relatives who had doubted her listened in silence, captivated by the depth and sincerity of her performance. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others leaned forward, trying to understand the emotions conveyed through each chord. Her playing was not just technically skilled. It was heartfelt, moving, and profoundly human. It revealed the side of her that words alone could never capture. A side of authenticity, courage, and emotional depth. When the piece ended, there was a long silence. No one spoke immediately, as if trying to process what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, applause began, quiet at first, then growing steadily. The young wife smiled softly, acknowledging the moment with calm grace. She returned to her seat beside the billionaire, who looked at her with a mixture of pride and admiration. Her music had done more than entertain. It had transformed perceptions, softened skepticism, and left an unforgettable impression on everyone present. The rest of the evening continued with a lighter, warmer atmosphere. Conversations flowed more freely, laughter returned, and the tension that had filled the room for months seemed to dissolve. The young wife moved among the relatives with natural confidence, sharing stories, listening attentively, and responding with genuine interest. Even those who had been most critical of her found themselves drawn in by her authenticity, her patience, and her kindness. By the end of the night, the mansion felt different. The young wife's presence had created a subtle but powerful shift. Staff members moved with greater ease, relatives spoke with less caution, and the billionaire's friends approached her with newfound respect. She had achieved something remarkable, not through force, argument, or confrontation, but through consistent, authentic, and human-centered behavior. Her patience, talent, and integrity had earned her the trust and admiration of those who had once doubted her. As she sat alone later that night, reflecting on the day, the young wife felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had faced skepticism, judgment, and subtle tests of her character, and she had responded with grace, honesty, and composure. Her music, her actions, and her demeanor had spoken louder than any rumors, demonstrating the power of authenticity and patience. She understood that life would continue to bring challenges, but she felt confident in her ability to navigate them with dignity and integrity. The following days continued in a similar pattern. Staff, relatives, and friends interacted with her differently, showing more respect and warmth. She remained humble, understanding that these changes were gradual and that trust was something that grew over time. She focused on her music, her daily routines, and her relationships with the people around her, knowing that each thoughtful action, each genuine gesture, and each note played on the piano reinforced the respect she had begun to earn. Even as admiration for her grew, she remained grounded. She understood that life in the public eye was unpredictable and that opinions could shift at any moment. She maintained her calm, patient, and authentic approach, recognizing that these qualities were her greatest strengths. Her music continued to serve as both an expression of her inner self and a bridge to connect with others, communicating honesty and emotion in ways words could never achieve. The young wife's journey was far from complete, but she had reached a significant milestone. She had transformed skepticism into curiosity, doubt into admiration, and judgment into respect. Through patience, authenticity, and the quiet power of her music, she had begun to leave an indelible mark on those around her. The mansion, once filled with tension and cautious glances, now carried an atmosphere of warmth, respect, and a subtle sense of harmony that reflected the positive change she had inspired. The days that followed the piano performance felt almost magical. The young wife had quietly transformed the atmosphere in the mansion, and even the relatives who had doubted her most seemed to view her differently. She walked through the halls now with a sense of ease, greeted by smiles and polite nods rather than suspicious glances. The staff, once cautious and reserved, now approached her with warmth and trust, asking for advice or simply sharing small moments of conversation. It was as though her presence had slowly but surely changed the energy of the entire household. Despite the subtle shifts, the young wife remained grounded. She understood that respect earned was fragile and needed continual care. She maintained her routines, waking early to play the piano, organizing her daily tasks, and interacting with the people around her with quiet patience. Music was her anchor, her constant companion, and her way of processing the world around her. Each time she sat at the grand piano, her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, creating melodies that reflected her emotions, thoughts, and experiences. It was not just skill, it was honesty in sound, something people felt even if they could not fully explain. One morning, the billionaire called her to join him in the study. He was reviewing documents related to his businesses, but his expression was lighter than usual. "I want you to come with me to the city," he said. "There is an important gathering, a sort of celebration for the family and some close associates. I want you there, but I also want you to be yourself." She nodded, understanding the subtle weight of the request. This was more than a social event. It was another test, another moment where perceptions and judgments would meet her authenticity. When they arrived at the city estate, the young wife noticed the gathering had drawn a mix of family members, friends, and business associates. Conversations hummed around her, and she could feel the curiosity and expectation in the air. Many had heard of her previous piano performance, but few had seen it for themselves. She knew that some were still skeptical, waiting for moments that might reveal flaws or mistakes. She kept her calm, reminding herself that her strength lay in being true to herself, not in trying to impress anyone. The evening began with formalities, polite conversation, and a light dinner. The young wife observed the dynamics around her carefully, noticing the subtle judgments, the whispered comments, and the occasional smile that betrayed admiration. She maintained a natural poise, speaking gently when addressed, listening attentively, and allowing her authenticity to guide her actions. Slowly, the tension in the room began to ease. People were still curious, but the previous doubts had softened under the weight of her composure and sincerity. After the dinner, the host suggested a small entertainment segment. She was asked to play the piano once more. Without hesitation, she walked to the grand piano placed near the window, sat down, and let her fingers hover over the keys. The room grew silent, the hum of conversation fading as all eyes turned toward her. She began with soft notes, gentle and deliberate, setting the tone with a melody that felt personal yet universal. Each chord carried a story, each pause a breath of emotion that captured the listeners in a way words could never achieve. As her music filled the room, she noticed subtle shifts in the audience. Skeptical relatives leaned forward, caught off guard by the depth and emotion in her performance. Friends and associates were silent, attentive, and visibly moved. Even the billionaire watched with a quiet admiration, feeling proud and amazed at the calm power and authenticity his wife conveyed through her music. The piece was not just about technical skill. It was a reflection of her life, her patience, her strength, and her genuine character. By the time she reached the crescendo, the entire room was captivated. The melodies intertwined with the emotions of the listeners, creating a connection that transcended assumptions, rumors, and judgments. She could see the expressions change, skepticism turning into awe, doubt into appreciation, curiosity into respect. Her music had created a bridge, showing people who she truly was without a single word of explanation. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence. No one spoke, hesitant to break the spell that had formed in the room. Then, gradually, applause began. It was soft at first, then grew steadily, filling the space with warmth and admiration. She rose from the piano, acknowledging the audience with a calm smile, and returned to her seat beside the billionaire. He squeezed her hand, sharing a quiet, private moment of pride and connection. Her music had spoken for her, and in that moment, it had said everything. The reactions that followed were remarkable. Relatives who had doubted her approached with sincere compliments. Staff members whispered about her talent, composure, and the way she had transformed the atmosphere. Friends of the billionaire admitted privately that they had misjudged her, seeing for the first time the depth and authenticity she brought into the household. Even business associates commented on her elegance and grace, not only in appearance but in demeanor and character. The young wife understood that this evening was more than a performance. It was a turning point, a moment where her consistent patience, integrity, and talent had shifted perceptions dramatically. People who had once whispered doubts were now acknowledging her strength and sincerity. She had not changed herself to fit expectations. She had simply remained true to her values and expressed her emotions through music, and that honesty had resonated with everyone. As the night continued, conversations became warmer and more personal. People asked about her music, her childhood, and the experiences that shaped her. She answered thoughtfully, never seeking attention or validation, but sharing small pieces of her life that reflected her authenticity. The room was filled with laughter, curiosity, and genuine engagement. She noticed how differently people treated her, how their eyes held respect instead of doubt, and how her presence had created a calm and positive energy in the gathering. Even the relatives who had been most critical seemed changed. They approached her with subtle questions, but these were now motivated by curiosity rather than judgment. They wanted to understand her, to see who she truly was, not to catch her in a mistake. It was a remarkable shift, one that demonstrated the power of authenticity, patience, and human connection. She had bridged a gap that many thought impossible, simply by being herself and expressing her emotions through her music. After the gathering ended, the mansion returned to its usual quiet, but the effect of the evening lingered. Staff members continued their routines with a renewed sense of respect and admiration. Relatives spoke in hushed tones about her talent, composure, and integrity. Even the billionaire noted the subtle changes in the household, seeing how her presence had created harmony, warmth, and genuine trust. Her journey of proving herself, of showing her character and authenticity, had reached a significant milestone. In the following days, she continued her routines with calm dedication. She practiced the piano, managed her responsibilities, and interacted with everyone with patience and grace. She understood that respect was earned gradually, and that trust could be fragile. But she also knew that her consistent authenticity had made a lasting impression, one that would shape how people perceived her for years to come. The young wife reflected often on her journey. She had faced skepticism, doubt, and subtle judgment, yet she had navigated each challenge with grace, patience, and integrity. Her music had been her voice, a way to communicate honesty and emotion that transcended words. She had proven to herself, and to those around her, that talent, authenticity, and human connection were far more powerful than assumptions or superficial judgments. Even as admiration for her grew, she remained humble. She understood that life in the public eye was unpredictable, that opinions could shift, and that challenges would continue to arise. She maintained her calm, patient, and authentic approach, knowing that these qualities were her greatest strengths. Her music, her actions, and her demeanor continued to speak louder than any rumor or criticism, solidifying her place in the household and in the hearts of those around her. Months passed, and the mansion felt transformed. The atmosphere, once tense and skeptical, now carried a sense of warmth, respect, and harmony. The young wife's consistent authenticity and talent had created a ripple effect, influencing not only the staff and family but also friends and associates who interacted with the household. She had earned trust and admiration, not through confrontation or assertion, but through the quiet power of her character and her music. One evening, as she sat at the piano, she reflected on the journey she had traveled. From the whispers of doubt to the cautious respect, from the skepticism of relatives to the admiration of friends, she had faced challenges that tested her patience, composure, and authenticity. She had met them not with anger or defensiveness, but with honesty, grace, and music. Each note she played was a testament to her journey, her growth, and her unwavering commitment to remain true to herself. The billionaire joined her quietly, watching her play. He did not need words to express his pride or admiration. He had witnessed her strength, patience, and authenticity firsthand. Her journey had not only earned her respect and admiration from others, but had also deepened his own appreciation and love for her. In the quiet of the evening, with the soft notes filling the mansion, there was a sense of peace, accomplishment, and connection that transcended words. By the end of the night, the young wife knew that her journey had reached a meaningful milestone. She had faced doubt, judgment, and skepticism, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. Her talent had bridged gaps, softened hearts, and left a lasting impression on everyone around her. She had proven that authenticity, patience, and human connection could overcome assumptions and transform perceptions in profound ways. And as she closed the piano lid and walked through the quiet halls of the mansion, she carried with her not only the respect and admiration of those around her, but also a deep sense of fulfillment and self-assurance. Her journey had been challenging, but it had revealed the quiet power of integrity, the lasting impact of sincere talent, and the beauty of staying true to oneself, no matter the circumstances.